Hey everybody, it's Rob here at etrailer.com. Today we're going to be taking a look at the CURT Gooseneck kit on our 2019 Ram 2500. Now our CURT Gooseneck Hitch is going to allow us to hook up to a gooseneck trailer and tow it down the road safely. But at the same time, it's going to allow us to remove the tow ball here and have full bed access. It's an extremely easy process. There's a little lever at the top. You can just flip it up, rotate it, and then the ball will come right out. And putting it in is just as easy. Slide it in place, rotate the lever to where it's in line with that notch, flip it down, now the ball is locked in place. Now what's going to keep the ball locked in is these ball bearings, and that lever is what's actually activating those ball bearings. You can see now they're locked out, so the ball's not going to be able to come out, but when we do lift the lever and rotate it, you can see they kind of fall in and there's no pressure on them. It's a really easy process, and I actually prefer this style ball and gooseneck to get the ball in place rather than having the lever that's in the wheel well. Because a lot of the times, sometimes they get stuck, they're not that easy to operate, and this is right here where we need to be. So once you unhook from your gooseneck and you want to take the ball out, you don't have to go over to the bed, come in the bed, pull the ball out. Everything is just one step, one easy way to do it. Now, like all trailers, you need a spot to hook up your safety chains. So you can see here we have a pretty good sized hook that fits on there perfectly well, and there's actually plenty of more room because this hook actually is spring loaded, just like the other one. So when we don't have our hooks in place, it's just going to sit maybe an inch or so, maybe a little bit less than an inch above the bed. But when we do need it, you can easily pull it up, and again, they're spring loaded, so they'll go right back down. Easy to slide things over and use your bed if you need to. And for those times when you're not towing, you take the goose ball out, and CURT actually provides you with this nice rubber cover. It's going to make sure that dirt, debris, and anything else isn't going to get inside the gooseneck hole, and it makes it a lot easier to slide things in place. If you've got some gear, some tools, or anything you need to get in the bed of your truck, it makes it nice and even so things aren't going to catch on the lip of anything. Now, like most gooseneck hitches, it is going to come with a 2 5/16 inch ball. That is a pretty standard size for most gooseneck trailers and couplers. Now, another thing you do want to keep in mind is the load limit or the weight limit of our hitch. Now, the hitch is going to have a 35,000 pound gross trailer weight rating. But something you do need to keep in mind is that's the rating for the hitch, so I do urge you to check your Ram's owner's manual because you don't want to exceed the manufacturer's rating. One thing I do want to mention about our CURT Gooseneck Hitch is it's not compatible with the CURT X5 adapter. That's the adapter that puts rails into the bed of your truck so you can use a fifth wheel. It slides right into the gooseneck. It's not going to work with this gooseneck hitch. So I've installed quite a few goosenecks in my time, and I do have to say that this CURT kit is a very straightforward install. There's no special tools required, and we're not going to have to do any kind of drilling or cutting on the frame. Now obviously we are going to have to drill a few holes in the bed because the ball has to get in place and our safety chains have to get in place. But that's only 5 holes that we're going to have to drill, and again, nothing to do with the frame. In fact, there's only one main component, and that's going to be the center section of the hitch to get installed. And it's not like the old style where we have to loosen the bed and possibly prop it up. Everything fits from underneath, and since it is only one component, you can do it by yourself. I recommend getting an extra set of hands because it can be a little cumbersome to try to lift it above your head and get the bolts in place, but it is possible. Again, it's probably one of the most straightforward installs that I've done, and just so you have the confidence to do it at home, let's go through the process together. To begin our installation, we want to lower down our spare tire. Then we can move underneath our truck, and we're going to have this heat shield right around where the spare tire was, just in front of the muffler here. We're going to go ahead and pull this down just to make things a little bit easier for ourselves. We're going to have 4 bolts that we'll see on the inside of that heat shield. So we'll use a 10mm socket to pull those out. Now there's 2 more bolts holding this heat shield in place. They're going to be nearly impossible to see, but they're on the back side of where it mounts to this cross member. One will be towards the outside of the heat shield, towards the center, and then the other one is going to be towards the passenger side. There's still going to be 10mm sockets, but maybe a little challenging to get in there to loosen them up. May have to come from the side, kind of reach in and get the socket on there. Once we have all the bolts removed, we'll pull the heat shield down and set it aside for now. Our next step is going to be lowering the exhaust down. We don't need to take the entire system down, but we do want to lower it down so we have a little bit more room to work with. So right here at the back, we'll have an exhaust hanger. Easiest way I've found to lower them down is to take some spray lubricant, spray the hanger down real good. And then we can take a pry bar, and we just want to slide that rubber isolator off so the exhaust can come down. Now, these are rather stiff, a little bit hard to get off, but just use the actual exhaust pipe to pry against. We should be able to slide that isolator off. And with this one removed, we're going to go ahead and move forward a little bit on the exhaust system, and there's two more that we'll have to take down as well. I do want to mention, you can see this strap right here. I'm going to go ahead and unclip it. It's just a little clip on there. It's going to take that off. That way it doesn't do any damage when the exhaust comes down. I'd like to go ahead and point out the attachment points of where we're going to be putting our gooseneck in. If we find that center section right here where we got two pieces of metal right underneath the bed, we're going to have four round holes, two in the back and two in the front, one on each side of our truck. Those are where our bolts are going to be mounting through, and we're just going to lift our center section up. Now, I do want to mention it's pretty heavy, so you may want to get an extra set of hands, and I'll go ahead and go over the hardware that's actually going to be going in place before we lift it up so it's a little bit easier to show. So once we have our center section lifted up, we're going to take a long bolt with a large flat washer. We're going to go through the cross member, through the center section, and we're going to secure it down with a flange nut. It's going to be the same combination for all four locations, but again, it's a lot easier to show you this now than trying to hold everything in place and get the bolts and nuts in place. So here's our center section. This is where the goose ball is going to go, but it is important that we put this in correctly. So this is going to be going up towards the top, and these four holes, the two on each side, need to be going towards the front. They're a little bit offset, and we want those to go towards the front. Now before we actually lift this up, we need to make sure that we put this center locator, drop it into the gooseneck hole just like that. We don't need to secure it down or anything. The pressure from lifting it into the bed will hold it in place fine, but we want to make sure we put this in because this is going to come in handy so we can make sure we get the hole drilled in the exact right location. So with the help with an extra set of hands, we're going to lift the center section up. You do want to be mindful of the hoses right here. And the exhaust can move a little bit. We'll work them around the hoses, get the front side in first. Again, make sure that center locator is in place. Lift it up. You want to at least get a couple bolts in place. That'll kind of help support it. And for now, just get one of the nuts hand tight so we can get the rest of the bolts in and work on getting the rest of the hardware in. Now I'm going to come back with an 1 1/8" socket and wrench and tighten up my hardware. Now I will let you know it is limited in space, as you can see, so I'm going to be using a swivel to help me get a little bit of extra room. But we're going to go through and snug down and tighten down all the hardware. I'm going to come back with a torque wrench. I'm going to torque all my hardware down to the specified amount in the instructions. I will let you know it's pretty high, so you are going to need a torque wrench, at least a 1/2 inch torque wrench to torque these bolts down. Now if the bolts are spinning, you are going to need to hold it with a wrench as well, so we can make sure that it actually torques them down and it's not just spinning. We'll go back and we're going to repeat that for all of our remaining hardware. Now at this point, we're getting ready to drill the hole. We want to start on the bottom and drill from the bottom going up into the bed. If you remember when we put that center locator in, there's a very small hole in the center of it. And if we look up into the hole, we can see the center locator, and that small hole is going to be for our pilot bit. So we're going to grab a 3/16 drill bit, go into the gooseneck receiver, and it will be a little bit difficult to see, but you can kind of just get a feel for it, and you want to get the bit in that center hole, and then we want to drill that 3/16 pilot bit all the way through the bed. So now that we have that hole drilled, we can move over to the side here, and when we have those 4 round holes, 2 on each side, those are going to be our safety chain loop locations. Now I'm going to go ahead and use the same pilot bit just to get a hole started, just to make it a little bit easier on myself. I'll drill up from the bottom again. Just going to drill a pilot hole in all 4 locations, and then we can come back and drill it out to the final size. Now the holes on the passenger side are going to be very difficult to get to because the exhaust is right in the way. Now we did loosen up those isolators, take them off, so there's some movement in the exhaust. So what I did was take a ratchet strap, find a secure point on the driver's side, and then just pull the exhaust over, and now I'm able to get my drill in and drill straight up. Now this is just a temporary fix. Easily, as soon as we let the strap loose, the exhaust will go back to where it is, but it just makes it a lot easier to drill that hole. Now that the pilot holes are drilled for our safety chain loops, I'm going to come back with an 11/16 drill bit. Now I realize not all of us have that size drill bit, but what we can do is if you don't have one of these, you can use a 1/2 inch drill bit, drill from the bottom going up, enlarge it to a full 1/2 inch. And then move to the top of the bed and use a step bit to step it up to an 11/16. But since I have an 11/16 drill bit, I'm going to drill from the bottom going up and going through the safety chain loops as a template. I'm going to go back and repeat that for the remaining 3 holes for our safety chain loops. Now that we have our 4 holes drilled and that pilot hole in the center, we want to move to the top of the bed, and we want to grab a 3 1/4 inch hole saw. And we're going to use that pilot hole that we drilled earlier to center our hole saw. And we're going to start drilling through, and honestly, once you start seeing plastic start coming up, you know you're all the way through and you can stop drilling, because we don't want to go into the gooseneck itself. So I'm going to use real light pressure. And then now that the hole saw is making contact with the bed, I'm going to turn my drill on high and again use a very light pressure and just start drilling until I can start seeing that plastic from that centering device that we put in earlier. Now you can see where it's starting to cut through. We can see that the blue plastic is there. So we're just going to keep going until this center section will come out all the way, because as you can see, it's only about halfway cut through. And now that piece is cut out, we can remove that center section. And I always like to come back with a file and some paint possibly if we hit the hitch, and to kind of cover up the edges to help prevent any kind of corrosion. So we'll go ahead and vacuum up all the excess shavings so we don't track them inside of our truck, and again come back and file all 5 holes, including the safety chain loops. Now it may be a little difficult to file since the hitch is so close to the hole we cut, so you just want to be careful. You don't want to scratch the hitch, but again, I like to take the sharp edges off so we don't have to worry about it when we're putting the ball in or taking it out. Now, although we already have a bed liner in our truck, I don't like to leave any exposed metal on the vehicle. So I'm going to come back with some spray paint, cover up the areas that we drilled out. Now, since our bed liner is black, I'm going to use some flat black paint, but you can also use clear if you don't have a liner and you really don't want to change the color of your truck. And at this point, we can grab our safety chain loops. You just want to take the 2 legs and drop them straight down. Now we can move back underneath the truck and get ready to put the hardware in for those. So where our U-bolts are dropping down, we want to grab one of the flat washers out of our kit. We'll slide it over one of the legs, take a spring, slide it above that, and we'll take another flat washer, kind of sandwich it in there, and then we want to take one of the lock nuts. It's got these little dots on there. We want to tighten it up, at least hand tight. It will kind of get tight on you, but we're going to get all 4 of these springs, washers, and nuts in place on each one of these. And then we're going to come back and tighten these up just to where the bottom of the bolt is flush or just barely coming out of the nut at the bottom. And to tighten up those lock nuts on the bottom, I'm going to be using a 15/16 socket. Now you can also use a 24mm, whichever one you have on hand. As you can see, that bolt's just flush with the bottom, so I'm just going to give it a few more turns to where it's just barely sticking out. We'll go on and repeat that for all the remaining nuts on our U-bolts that we have. So now that all the bolts in our gooseneck are tight, I'm going to go ahead and take the strap off that was supporting the exhaust, pulling it out of the way. And then we can start putting all the rubber isolators and hangers back in place as well. Now when you're putting your rubber isolators back on, it'll definitely help to spray a little more lubricant on the hanger and on the isolator. Just makes things slide a lot easier and we won't have to fight it as much. And once you have everything back, don't forget to put the strap on as well. Just clip it back in place. Slide those isolators back on. May help if you use a pry bar because they are pretty stiff, and even with the lubricant they can be a little tough to slide on. And then we can get our heat shield back in place. I like to get a few bolts just loosely started. It'll help hold it up. Makes it a little bit easier to get these ones that are on the cross member started because there's a little bit of play, so I don't have to reach and try to get everything perfectly lined up. And we'll use that same 10mm socket to tighten up those bolts. Now what we have left to do is put our spare tire back in place and we're ready to hit the road. Now if you're not going to go ahead and hook up right away, CURT does give you this cover that we can slide right into the gooseneck hole. Make sure it keeps all that dirt, debris, and everything else out of there. It just gives it a nice clean look. Now if you are ready to hook up and you need to put the ball in place, go ahead and grab the ball, and you'll notice on top we have this little lever. We want to flip that lever up and turn it to the side. That'll release the ball bearings, drop the ball in, we'll rotate it back, Make sure it latches down. Now it's locked into place. It's just that simple. But again, I'm Rob here at etrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the CURT Gooseneck on our 2019 Ram 2500.